Welcome to the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Henry Fortunato, Director of Public Affairs. So, the question for tonight is, who was Mordechai Chaim Rumkowski? Who was this 63-year-old Jewish businessman of erratic talents who in 1940 became the Ghetto Chairman in Lódz, the second largest Jewish ghetto in Nazi-occupied Poland? Following the 1939 invasion of Poland, Rumkowski concluded that his survival rested upon his ability to make the ghetto indispensable to the Germans. Acting on this belief, he sought to transform it into a productive industrial complex. To this end, he used his power to force adults and children alike to work punishing hours in factories and workshops to provide supplies for the German military. So, was Rumkowski a ruthless opportunist, a willing accessory to the Nazi regime and simply driven by his own lust for power? Or was he a pragmatic strategist who managed to save many Jewish lives through his collaboration? Sometimes only a novelist can answer these questions. This is what Steve Sem-Sandberg has set out to do. His extraordinary novel, The Emperor of Lies, draws on genuine chronicles of life in the Lódz ghetto to reflect on the most difficult questions about survival and oppression. Now published in over 20 languages, The Emperor of Lies is being hailed as one of the great Holocaust novels of the 21st century. As the New York Times put it, Sem-Sandberg's mostly artful use of archival material gives the fictional reconstruction a gravitas, a form of legitimacy that it might not have on its own, while the fictive element allows us as readers to call upon all our powers of empathy and projective identification to imagine ourselves into the doomed fates of the ghetto's denizens. Steve Sem-Sandberg is one of Scandinavia's most admired authors. He was born in Oslo in 1958 and now divides his time between Vienna and Stockholm. He is a literary critic and a translator, as well as a prize-winning novelist. The Emperor of Lies is a bestseller in Scandinavia and won the August Prize, the Swedish equivalent of the Man Booker Prize, in 2009. The Emperor of Lies is available for sale, courtesy of our friends at Barnes & Noble, and Steve will sign copies following his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Steve Sem-Sandberg.
The first one you see is the same as is on the cover of the book. It is the main street of the ghetto, you could say. It's called the Łagewnicka Street, and it ran through the center of this ghetto. There is a reason why I put it on the front of the book, and I will not give you my own answer to this, but I will just pose it as a question. How many photographs of a mass of people have you seen when each and every body in this mass looks back at you? It's stunning, isn't it? If we have time later on in the Q&A session, I will tell you a little bit more about the history behind these photographs that I will show you tonight. I also write about it in the afterword of my book. So we will see if we have time. I will just walk you through a little bit about the ghetto first, so that you know where the book takes place. The Ghetto of Łódź was the second largest in Poland. The German occupying forces set up around 200 ghettos where they put the Jews in Poland altogether. The largest of them was, of course, everybody knows, the ghetto in Warsaw. You can read about in books and see in films and so on. It's also the most famous ghetto for the simple reason that the Jews actually rose up against their Nazi oppressors, took arms against them, which was the first time and completely unbelievable at the time, but they did. In Łódź, the story was a little bit different. It was the second largest, as I said, but it was also a different kind of town. If somebody in America or any other place would ask me to what city could Łódź be compared, I think everybody also in Łódź would say it's Poland's Manchester. And that actually says it all, because this city was home to a large textile industry. And most of the big factory owners were Jews. So they had a lot invested in their city, in capital and industries, and they were loath to leave Łódź when they had a chance. So many were left. I will bore you with a little bit statistics just so that you know how many people it actually were. The city of Łódź had a population of around 850 and 900,000 before the war, before the occupation. And about 1/3 or even more, around 250,000 people were of Jewish origin. And that is a lot. And some of them managed to get out of Poland in time, but many were left. So what the Germans did when they came in the fall of 1939 was to set up the poorest district of the city. It's quite close to the city center, you wouldn't believe it. But it was extremely poor at that time and is still today. It had no sanitation, so there was hardly any sanitation, so there were no sewers under the city proper through which arms could be smuggled, for example, like in Warsaw. So when the ghetto was sealed off, it was completely sealed off. So nobody inside knew anything about what was happening outside. And I would just to make this a little bit more understandable, because there are many people to this day who says, not only in Poland, who says that the ghetto was put up in order to protect the Jews as well as, putting these kinds of voices can be heard still today. And for that reason, when I go around and present my book like this, I will read you just one small passage from the Nazi commander who actually gave the order to set up this ghetto in 1939. And I want you to listen very carefully to what he says. I actually put it in the first, even before the prologue of the book, because I consider it to be so important. His name is Übelhör, and he says like this about the ghetto that is being set up. Naturally, the establishment of the ghetto is only a temporary measure. I reserve the right to decide when and how the city of Łódź is to be purged of Jews. The ultimate aim must be to burn away this infectious abscess entirely, once and for all. And this he says in a memorandum that is classified as confidential and written in the city of Łódź the 10th of December 1939. So that leaves no doubt at all about what the intentions of the Nazis were. Like in all other of the Jewish ghettos, the Nazis forced their orders through somebody who could do it for them. This function was called the Jude Älteste in German, the eldest of the Jews. who usually was a Jewish council chairman. And they had one in the Ghetto Łódź too. And you will see him now. He looked like this. And as you heard, his name is Mordechai Chaim Rumkowski. And this picture of him, taken by the same photographer, really says it all. In the ghetto, when it was sealed in the first few months of 1940, there lived about 160,000 Jews. And to this man, into his hands, the fates and destinies of all those Jews were handed. He was 63 years old at the time, and that you can see from the picture. There were no vehicles or motor vehicles at all in the ghetto. These were not allowed. But there were some horse-drawn carriages, and Chaim Rumkowski owned the noblest of them all. And he made a habit out of going around in the ghetto, inspecting factories and so on, personally in this carriage. And he had his own driver, as you can see. The idea that Rumkowski had, and what really made him different from all the other council leaders, was that Łódź, being this town for textile production, there was a lot of machinery out there that he could just confiscate. And there were a lot of people who knew how to make clothes because they were working in the big factories. So he just ordered them to go as workers. And in just 3 months of in the beginning of 1940, he set up 120 different factories in the ghetto area, which is amazing. It's so amazing that even just in a few months, the ghetto became the most productive part of Poland at all. And even so productive that Heinrich Himmler himself, which was the Reichsführer of the Third Reich, came to visit him. And look at these photographs. Not many people have seen it. You can see it's the 4th of June, 1941. And if you are not too nearsighted, you will be able to see Heinrich Himmler sitting at the right-hand side of the driver of the car. And there is the complete array of Nazi soldiers of different ranks surrounding him. And he's not even deigning to step out of his car. In front of him, with his head bowed, gray-haired, as is befitting a man of his position and age, and with a Jewish star that everybody in the ghetto had to wear on his breast or on the backside, stands Rumkowski. And there's a saying about this meeting that Heinrich Himmler said to Rumkowski. So it's true then, Rumkowski, that you have set up the most successful ghetto in the entire Warteland, as it was called, the occupied part of Poland. And Rumkowski answers, this is not a ghetto, Herr Reichsführer. This is a city of workers. So then it's true then, Rumkowski, that you are the richest man in Łódź, or Lódz, he would have said. And Rumkowski answers, I'm rich, Herr Reichsführer, because I have a whole people that can work for you. And of course, this was the plan. Rumkowski knew, if not the exact wording, but exactly what's said in this document, that the intention of the Germans was to get rid of every single Jew that lived in that city. And Rumkowski had a saying. He said, "We shall be 10 minutes before each and every German order. We will act 10 minutes before each and every German order is given." And that's what he actually succeeded in doing. And when Himmler came to visit, the thing he wanted to know is that if it was true what everybody told him, that this success was really down to this single man only. And according to what he later said when he came back to Berlin, he was deeply impressed by what he saw. That didn't change his opinion about Jews, but he was deeply impressed by what he saw. This is the reality of the ghetto, taken from a different angle by a different photographer and with different type of film. And here you can see how the daily life looked like for all those people who worked for Rumkowski and for the Third Reich. The ghetto was divided into 3 parts, and through the 2 largest parts, there was what was called an Aryan corridor at the time. So you see the tramway in the picture, the lower left-hand side of the picture. That is in the carriage cars of this tramway. There sits the Germans and the Poles in different wagons, but anyway. So they traveled through the ghetto area each and every day. So when people say in Poland or in Germany that nobody knew what happened behind the fences, the boarded up fences, they're obviously lying. You can see that from the picture. And on these wooden bridges that actually connected the 3 parts of the ghetto, these bridges were, I'm sorry, I have only the European measurements, but it was 5 meters and 17 centimeters high. And you can see on the picture how high they were. And these wooden bridges, each and every one that worked in the ghetto had to cross at least 4 times a day, because they often lived in places that were in another part of the ghetto from their workplace. And try to imagine, that's at least what I try to do in my book, how it feels when the only food you get each day is 2 bowls of soup. And the condition for at all receiving these 2 bowls of soup is that you are at your workplace and you put in a load of 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. This is the only thing you have to survive on. And imagine then how it feels to climb these wooden stairs each morning, all the way to the top and down again. Somebody counted, there are 133 steps on each bridge. And when you come down after climbing them in the morning, when you're on your way to work, you're completely exhausted. You cannot take one more step, and then you have to go to work. And this was the reality that every Jew in the ghetto of Łódź had to face every day in order just to get food. Rumkowski was, before he was appointed the chairman of this ghetto, he was known as an orphanage director. He was the director of the largest orphanage in the city of Łódź. And he took his children with him into the ghetto and set up around 6 or 7 smaller orphanages for children who didn't have relatives or parents. And he really made a thing out of really caring for the children. And you can see now in this picture, which I brought with me, and on every trip I make, because I think it's so fascinating to see how people actually lived. The children were always the privileged in the ghetto. And here you can see they are celebrating somebody's birthday, probably. And they are proudly showing off everything they have to eat. And if you see one of the nurses or kitchen workers, I wouldn't know who they would be, they hold up, the woman to the left, she holds a bowl of something. And the boys who are squatting or sitting at the corner of the table to the right-hand side, they have 2 slices of brownish bread to share, and that is what they have to celebrate on. But this is obviously a celebration of some kind, because everybody is collected in the same, around the table, and there are, I mean, everything is there, napkins, glasses, everything. And everybody is set up to smile towards the camera. This picture was taken probably before September 1941, because in 1941, the Germans, true to what I read to you, ordered Rumkowski to order out of the ghetto each and every person who could not work. And those were all children under 10 years of age, and all older people over 65. Those were considered not able to work. So if you would have looked at this picture after September 1942, you would not have seen the kids on the right-hand part of the picture. And this is why I always show this picture, because abstract figures and statistical material, it really screams at you, but nothing shows the reality as much as this picture does. When this order was given, Rumkowski called every single individual in the ghetto to come and listen to him, and he gave a speech. And this speech is considered to be one of the most interesting documents in the Holocaust history at all, because of what he says. His counterpart in the Warsaw Ghetto was given a similar order. Everybody was given the same order. His name was Adam Cherniakov, and at that time, when the order was given that he should deport all young people under 10 years of age and all old people, he said, "This I cannot do," and he committed suicide. There's a limit to what I can do to my own people. Rumkowski did not commit suicide. Instead, he gave this speech. And this speech is, I'm now holding up an English version of the book, so it looks slightly different. This speech is also in my book. I chose to put it there in its entirety, you say in English, I think. There's not one word omitted, and there's not one word added. And this is actually what he says to those 120,000 Jews still remaining in the ghetto at that time. And listen to this, because it's interesting. Listen really to what he says. So I'm not quoting from my book now, I'm quoting him. Yesterday, I was ordered to deport more than 20,000 people from the ghetto. They said they would do it themselves. The question was whether we should take on this odious task ourselves or leave it to others. But since our guiding principle is not how many will disappear, but how many can we save, we decided, that is me and my closest colleagues, we decided that however hard it might be, we had to implement a ruling ourselves. I had to carry out the cruel and bloody operation myself. I had to amputate the arms and the legs of the body. I had to let the children go. If I did not do it, then maybe yet more would have to go. So we did. There are many diaries were kept in the ghetto, and one of the most painful to read is the one, I will not quote from it, but it describes how the ghetto looked before September 1942. And there were always kids running about. They were screaming, there were no windows. You had no panes of glass, you had no wood at all. So everybody could hear what the children were doing in the apartments and in the rooms. And then after September 1942, everything fell silent. Not one single sound from anybody. Everybody were working. So then look at this picture. These are the lucky ones. These are kids over 10 years. So they can stay in the ghetto and work. And since children were considered to be not skilled workers, they also had to do the dirtiest work of all. And this picture is taken, I've been led to believe, I'm not entirely sure, but I've been told that it's from a tannery in the ghetto. But these are the lucky ones, those who could stay. Now there has been some very long, over many, many decades and years, a controversy regarding Rumkowski. You heard from my quotation of his speech, he said, I have to amputate the limbs from the body. I have to carry out this bloody operation myself. There are some who believe that Rumkowski was just carrying out orders and he was acting in good faith. But if that would have been the case and he didn't know where the transportations went, why would he use the word bloody? And why would he use the metaphor that he does, amputating the limbs from the body? Of course he knew. He knew from the very beginning where all these transports went. He knew. Now then again, there are people who argue that he had no choice, he had no real choice. Because if he didn't carry out these orders, as he says himself, the SS would go in and they would show no mercy to anybody. So he did what was necessary in that situation. That might be true in a way. We will never know what he actually thought. I do not position myself in this controversy, if you may call it that. I try in my book to open as many perspectives into his way of thinking as humanly possible. There remains the fact that because of his action, more people did survive, actually, the ghetto than in Łódź, than in many other ghettos. And I meet them all the time in places near and far. And many of them say, if Rumkowski had not been, I would not have been sitting here talking to you today. And you would have no witnesses to talk to, and you would have not been able to write your book. And that is true. But nobody has talked to all those 160,000 people who had no choice and were just put on a list and then deported for no reason. Well, the only reason being that they were under 10 years of age. I will not tell you more about Rumkowski tonight because I want you really to read the book, and the book is the answer to the question, who was he? It's a book that's quite long, so it's not an easy question and it's not a simple answer. I took here the liberty to collect a few images of him that nobody, or at least very few people have seen, and it shows his many different faces. Here you see him on an inspection tour of one of the soup kitchens in the ghetto, and you can really see that he is extremely upset and angry. And this is the face he shows in many pictures he did not want anybody else to see. And look at the man standing on the right-hand side of him with the armband with the Star of David on it. It's his private bodyguard. Not even Rumkowski could move freely inside the ghetto without fearing for his own life. And that from people who did not carry one single arm except their own hands or feet. And in all these pictures you see him with the same bodyguard or even bodyguards. Now look at this grandfatherly figure on the right-hand side. It's also Rumkowski. And the young woman on his right, in the middle of the picture, is the woman he married in the ghetto. Her name was Regina. Her first name was Regina. And she was 30 years younger than he. And not many people have seen how she looked like in reality. So here she is. I'm a little bit proud of this picture because I found them in the archives myself and they haven't been published in books, that's why. And here you see his smiling wife. Now, I will give you an example of the third reason why many people argue that Rumkowski did the right thing. I hope. I don't know how many of you can read this close script, maybe not at all. And if you you would also have to be fluent in German, because this is written in German. This is the main source of my book. It's a page from the so-called Ghetto Chronicle. It was a diary or a chronicle that was kept because Rumkowski ordered it to be kept. Because when everything started, Rumkowski was so sure that he would take and lead his people out of this Babylon. And he, for that reason, wanted to keep register about everything he did. And this chronicle is set up each and every day in the same way. It's about 3,500 pages long. It's a unique document, extremely interesting. But each and every day has its own statistics in the beginning. I don't know if you can see this. It's on the 1, 2, 3, 4th, 5th line. You will see in German it says Bevölkerungsstand, and that is how many people actually lived in the ghetto. And I think it says 76,401. This is the Tagesbericht, the day of the 22nd of June 1944. Now, you have to do a little bit of history and mathematics at the same time. 1 year and 3 months before this diary entry was written, the ghetto in Warsaw, the uprising was crushed, and there was not one house standing and not one Jew living. And the same goes for most of the other ghettos in Poland. But in Rumkowski's kingdom, in his ghetto, people are still working like slaves, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And for that reason, and because of course that the Germans earn a lot of money out of this, there are still so many Jews remaining in the ghetto. Now think, 8 months after this entry was made, the Russians came and liberated the entire city of Łódź, just 8 months afterwards. And think, how would Rumkowski be spoken about today? What would his reputation have been if they had come 7 or 8 months earlier? Then 76,400 Jews would have been saved. And he and his actions and his speech and his decision about the old people and the children would have been seen as to be heroic, right? It's impossible to answer these questions in a single sentence. If somebody woke me up in the middle of the night and said, did Rumkowski do right or wrong? I would, with my backbone, said he did the most wrong that anybody could do. This is just my moral reflex, and I think that all of you would have the same opinion. But the fact remains that in the summer of 1944, there were more Jews surviving in the ghetto of Łódź than anywhere else. Now, there's an irony to this, and this is also the reason why I chose to show you this entry. Because the 22nd of June, 1944, the rumors spread like wildfire through the ghetto that Himmler had ordered the final liquidation of the ghetto. And it says in the 3 sections further down. So what began at that time, at that day, was the final deportations. They kept on deporting people all through that summer, but luckily, because the Russians were so close, they couldn't take the deportees to the Chelmno camp where they were gassed, but they took them instead to Auschwitz. And most of those, I would say nearly all of those who actually survived, the 5,000 to 10,000 who actually survived the ghetto, were taken to Auschwitz in the last months of the ghetto's existence. And on the very last train, I don't know if you can see it, July 30 is the last day when the record is kept. And why is that, you would ask? Because that is when those who kept the record were put on the trains. So there were nobody left to write the Chronicle. And on the very last train, the 28th of August 1944, also Rumkowski went, together with his beautiful young wife, his adopted child, and his entire family. And 2 days afterwards, at least, or the day afterward, they were all murdered in Auschwitz. Because the Nazis, true to what I read to you from the beginning, They didn't have any use for him anymore. There was no ghetto for him anymore. And the intention was to be fulfilled, that all the Jews were to be exterminated. Of course. It was stated in this document from the beginning. I will just finish with this part of my presentation by talking a little bit more about the many sources I've had to write the book. The Chronicle, of course, was extremely important, and also talking to survivors who have their own personal memories of what actually happened. But the most important thing were the personal diaries that were kept in the ghetto. There were quite a few of them. I will just leave you with a quotation from one of them. Since everything was scarce in the ghetto, paper also, of course, was scarce. There was no food, there was nothing to use as heating material, and everything had to be spared. So this young woman, for a reason, I think she was a young woman, used a book she had kept. And you can see it in the middle. It's a French novel of some kind. I would assume it's not a great French novel. It's probably a very light book. It's called Le Vrais Riche, which means in French the real rich people. The true rich people, you would say in English. And she has used every inch of that book to write her diary. So this is the title page. And there was also notes running all around in the margins of the text, all through the end of the book. And I will just quote you from what she writes in the diary entry. And she has carefully put the date in. If you can read it, you will see. It's the 1st of July, 1944. And I have to remind you now, it's 8 days after this quote from the Chronicle, which I showed you just a few minutes ago, when the rumors started to spread and the liquidation of the ghetto began. And now suddenly on the first page of the book, you can read this. 1st of July 1944. I write these lines in the greatest disturbance of mind because of our decidedly badly turning fate. And the amazing thing, it's written in English. Can you see that? But it's also written in Hebrew, Polish, and Yiddish. There's one more. I mean, the entire diary is written this way. On page 68 to 69 in the book, it says, if somebody is out there and read this, please come in and let us out. In 5 languages. And why did she do this? I mean, when paper was so scarce. She did it because these things were happening to her. She thought she was completely alone, and she wanted to in some way signal to those who were outside that she was still alive, and please come and save us. But nobody came. When I wrote my book, also, beside the photo from the orphanage, I also put this. And the Swedish original title of the book is a way of turning this diary, Le Vrais Riche, into the title of my book. It's a different title in English than from Swedish. And I put these 2 documents together in front of me, in front of my computer, and I had them in front of me all the time when I wrote the book, so as to not forget what the book is really about. It's not a book about history, it's not even a book about the Holocaust, it's a book about human beings. And with these words, I will thank you for your attendance. Thank you.